A $20 bill. That's what was sitting on the kitchen counter when I got home from my son's wedding celebration dinner. A single $20 bill folded once, tucked under a coffee mug like a tip left for a waiter. No card, no note. Just Andrew's handwriting on a post-it stuck to the mug. For your trouble, Dad. Thanks for coming. For your trouble. I stood in my kitchen in Dayton, Ohio, still wearing my one good blazer, the navy one I'd bought 3 years ago for my retirement ceremony, and I stared at that bill for a long time. Long enough for the refrigerator to hum through 2 full cycles. Long enough for the neighbor's dog to bark and stop and bark again. I picked it up, held it under the kitchen light, and I thought about the $214,000 I had spent on my son over the past 11 years. Not a rough estimate. Not a rounded number. $214,000. I know because I'd kept every receipt, every bank statement, every wire transfer confirmation in a manila folder, in the bottom drawer of my desk, the same drawer where I used to keep birthday cards from his mother before she passed. My name is Gerald. I'm 63 years old. I drove a city bus for the Chicago Transit Authority for 28 years, and after that I worked nights as a facilities supervisor at a logistics warehouse in Dayton until my knees gave out at 61. I am not a wealthy man. I never have been, but I was a careful man, and I was a devoted father. And those two things together, careful and devoted, turned out to be the most expensive combination a man like me could be. I want to tell you what happened. Not because I need sympathy. I'm past the point of needing that. I want to tell you because I think there are other fathers out there, men who gave everything they had to a child who learned, somewhere along the way, to see that giving as a guarantee rather than a gift. And I want those men to hear how this story ends. Andrew was my only child. His mother, Diane, died of pancreatic cancer when Andrew was 19 and I was 44. We had 17 days from diagnosis to funeral. 17 days during which I sold our car, wiped out our savings account, and took out a second mortgage on the house just to cover the medical bills that insurance didn't touch, which was most of them. When it was over, I had a house I could barely afford, a 19-year-old son starting his sophomore year at Ohio State, and about $800 in checking. I worked. That's what I did. I picked up overtime on the bus routes through the winter, double shifts on holidays, every Saturday and Sunday for 4 years straight. I ate lunch from a thermos I packed at 5 in the morning. I didn't take a vacation for 6 years. I didn't buy myself a new pair of shoes until the soles of my old ones separated at the toe. I did all of this because Andrew was in college, and college cost money. And I had promised Diane, I had promised her in those 17 days that I would get him through. I got him through. Andrew graduated from Ohio State in 4 years with a degree in business administration and not a dollar of student loan debt. I paid his tuition every semester. I paid his apartment rent his junior and senior year because the dorms were expensive and he said the off-campus place was cheaper, which turned out to be true by about $40 a month. I paid for his textbooks. I sent him a check for $300 every month for groceries and incidentals. When his laptop died junior year, I bought him a new one, $900 I put on a credit card and paid off over 8 months. He graduated. I sat in that stadium in Columbus in a folding chair with about 40,000 other families. And when Andrew walked across that stage, I cried so hard the woman next to me handed me a pack of tissues from her purse. It was the proudest day of my life. The happiest I had felt since before Diane got sick. 3 weeks later, Andrew told me he had a job offer in Seattle, a marketing firm. Good salary, he said. Real opportunity. He was going and he needed help with the move. I gave him $4,000 for the move. He drove out with 2 friends in a rented truck and called me when he got there to say the apartment was great and the city was incredible and he'd call me Sunday. He called on Sundays for about a year. Then it became every other Sunday. Then it became when he remembered, which was sometimes twice a month and sometimes not at all. I told myself this was normal. Young man, new city, building a life. I told myself Diane would have said the same thing. Let him go. Let him grow. Then he met Melissa. Melissa was from Bellevue, Washington. Her family had money, real money, the kind that comes with a last name people recognize, and a father who golfs 3 times a week at a private club. Her father's name was Richard, and from the first time Andrew mentioned him, I could hear something in my son's voice that I hadn't heard since he was about 8 years old, and desperate to impress the most popular kid in his 3rd grade class. A kind of straining eagerness. a need to be chosen. Andrew brought Melissa to Dayton for Thanksgiving the year they'd been dating about 8 months. She was pleasant enough, polite, careful with her words, the kind of person who compliments your home in a way that makes you suddenly aware of everything in it that's old or worn. She looked at my kitchen table, the one Diane and I bought at a garage sale in 1991, the way a person looks at something they're already deciding not to keep. Andrew looked at everything through her eyes that weekend. I could see it happening in real time. This slow recalibration. The way he'd glance at her when I said something to gauge whether it landed right. He'd never done that before. He used to be the kind of kid who laughed at his own jokes before he finished telling them. That weekend, he waited. They got engaged 14 months later. I found out by text. Not a phone call, a text, sent to me at the same time as what I assume was a larger group, with a photo of Melissa's hand and the ring. I texted back congratulations and spent the rest of that evening sitting on the back porch with a glass of water, watching the streetlights come on. The wedding planning began immediately. It was Melissa's family who led that process, which I understood they were paying the bulk of it, and they had opinions about venue and catering and flowers that I was not positioned to compete with. But Andrew called me about 6 weeks into the planning and told me there were some costs that he was hoping I could help with. The rehearsal dinner was tradition, he explained. Groom's family typically covers the rehearsal dinner. The venue Melissa's family had in mind was a restaurant in Seattle, a nice place, private room, sit-down dinner for 62 people. He sent me the quote, $11,400. I said yes. I put $6,000 on a credit card and pulled $5,400 from what remained of a small investment account I'd been building for 10 years. I told myself it was worth it. I told myself Diane would have wanted me to do this. Then, 4 months before the wedding, Andrew called again. There were some additional costs. The photographer they'd originally booked had canceled. The replacement was more expensive. His share came to $4,800. Could I help? I helped. 2 months before the wedding, the groomsmen suits needed to be covered. He had 5 groomsmen, and the suits were being custom ordered. He wasn't asking me to pay for all of them, just to loan him the money until after the honeymoon when he'd be back on his feet financially. $2,200. I paid it. I never saw it again. At this point, I had spent $18,400 on this wedding, on top of everything from the college years. I was 61 years old, recently retired due to my knees, living on a fixed income of Social Security and a small pension that together came to about $2,100 a month. I had roughly $31,000 left in savings. It was everything I had. The wedding itself was in June, in Seattle, at a venue on the water that cost what I calculated to be somewhere around $40,000 just for the space. There were 220 guests. There was a live band, a raw bar, a photo booth with custom frames, a dessert table that took up an entire wall. Richard, Melissa's father, walked through all of it with the comfortable ease of a man who had written a check and moved on. Richard was a tall man, broad-shouldered, silver-haired in the way that looks distinguished rather than old. He was gracious when Andrew introduced us. He shook my hand firmly, said he'd heard a lot about me, said Andrew was a fine young man. He had the easy warmth of someone who's never had to try too hard for anything. I liked him, which surprised me. I hadn't expected to like him. At the reception, I watched Andrew and Richard together. They had clearly spent time together by then, real time. The kind that builds a language between two people. Inside jokes. Shorthand. Richard clapped Andrew on the back and Andrew leaned into it, and I felt something shift quietly inside me, some small weight that settled in my chest and stayed there. I sat at a table with some of Diane's cousins I hadn't seen in years, and 2 couples from Melissa's extended family, who were perfectly kind, and with whom I had absolutely nothing to talk about. I ate salmon. I drank 1 glass of wine. I gave my toast. I had practiced it 12 times, and it lasted 4 minutes, and Andrew hugged me after with genuine warmth. The first time I had felt genuinely close to him in longer than I wanted to calculate. Then they left for their honeymoon in Portugal, and I flew back to Dayton. The Sunday calls stopped entirely. I told myself, honeymoon, then settling back in, then the new rhythms of married life. I gave it 3 months before I let myself notice. Then I gave it another month before I said anything. I texted Andrew asking if everything was all right. He texted back, "Yeah, Dad, all good, just been crazy busy. Talk soon." Talk soon meant 6 weeks later, a 12-minute phone call during which Andrew told me about a new project at work and asked almost nothing about me. I told him I'd had some pain in my left knee again. He said that was too bad. I told him I was thinking of getting a dog. He said that could be nice. We hung up and I sat with the phone in my hand and I thought, this is what I paid $214,000 for. Let me tell you how I arrived at that number, because I want you to understand that I did not sit down one bitter evening and inflate it for effect. I sat down with the manila folder and I added it up carefully, line by line, the way I have done everything in my life. 4 years of Ohio State tuition, $38,400. 4 years of monthly living expense checks, $14,400. Laptop, $900. Moving costs to Seattle, $4,000. Various loans over the years. He lived in Seattle for a car repair, a security deposit when he moved apartments, a medical bill he couldn't cover that he promised to pay back, $9,600. Rehearsal dinner, $11,400. Wedding photographer's share, $4,800. Groomsmen suits, $2,200. The flight to Seattle for the wedding, the hotel for 4 nights, $1,900. A wedding gift of $5,000 in cash because I didn't know what else to give a couple who had everything. Plus, the years before college school trips, sports equipment, braces that insurance covered only halfway, the years of just being a father in the ordinary sense. $214,000 is a conservative accounting. It is probably more. Christmas came. It was the first Christmas since Andrew's wedding, and I had not seen him since June, since the day he hugged me after my toast and disappeared into the crowd of 220 people celebrating his new life. I had spoken to him 5 times in 6 months. I had sent him a birthday card in October that he acknowledged with a thumbs-up emoji. He called me 2 weeks before Christmas to tell me he and Melissa were hosting a holiday dinner this year, their first as a married couple, in their new house in Bellevue. They'd bought a house. He mentioned this in passing, as though I knew, as though we were the kind of father and son who kept each other informed. They'd bought a house in Bellevue, 4 bedrooms, and they were hosting Richard and Melissa's mother, Janet, and Melissa's sister and her husband. And would I like to come? I bought a flight. I bought a gift, a handmade quilt from an artisan shop in Dayton, the kind of thing Diane would have given, something made by hand rather than ordered online. It cost me $180, which was more than I should have spent, but I was trying. I was making an effort to bridge something I could feel widening. The house was beautiful. Of course it was. 4 bedrooms in Bellevue, on a tree-lined street with a 2-car garage and a kitchen that had been recently renovated. You could tell by the way the countertops still had that unlived-in perfection. Melissa had decorated for Christmas with the precise, coordinated aesthetic of someone who had used a designer, or at minimum, a very specific Pinterest board. Everything was cream and gold and eucalyptus. Richard and Janet arrived just after I did. They came in through the side door without knocking, the way people do in houses where they feel at home. Richard was driving a new truck. I noticed it in the driveway. Dark gray. Enormous. Still bearing the lot sticker in the rear window. Dinner was lovely, genuinely. Melissa had cooked a standing rib roast, and the table was set with care, and everyone was in good spirits. Andrew was a warm and attentive host, moving around the table, making sure glasses were full, making sure everyone had what they needed. He was good at this, I realized. He had grown into a man who was good at surfaces. After dinner, Andrew said he had some gifts to give. He had gifts for Melissa's sister and her husband, a weekend getaway package to a resort on the Olympic Peninsula. He had gifts for Janet, a spa package, a piece of jewelry. Then he turned to his father-in-law. Richard, Andrew said, and he was smiling in the way I hadn't seen him smile since he was a boy, wide open, genuinely happy, the smile that used to mean he'd done something he was proud of. I have been thinking about how to thank you for everything you've done for us, for welcoming me into this family. He handed Richard an envelope. Richard opened it. Inside was a gift card. No, not a gift card. A certificate from a dealership. It's for the truck, Andrew said. The one in the driveway. It's yours. Fully paid." Richard blinked. Then he laughed a real, startled laugh and stood up and wrapped Andrew in a hug. Janet pressed her hand to her mouth. Melissa was crying, the good kind of crying, the kind that means everything went exactly as planned. Melissa's sister was taking photos on her phone. The truck was a Ford F-250 Limited. I know because I looked it up later that night in the guest room while everyone else was watching a movie in the living room. $72,000 base price. Andrew had probably paid somewhere between $68,000 and $74,000, depending on options and negotiation. $74,000. Then Andrew turned to me. He walked over to where I was sitting and he placed something on the table in front of me. A gift bag. Small, paper, the kind that comes from a grocery store's gift wrap section. Inside was a box of chocolate-covered pretzels from the airport gift shop. I could tell from the branding and an envelope. Inside the envelope was a Visa gift card. $50. He said, "Thanks for making the trip, Dad. Really glad you could be here." I looked at my son. He was already half turning back toward the room, toward Richard, who was laughing about something, toward Melissa, who was refilling glasses. He had moved on before I had processed what had happened. I looked at that gift card for a long time. Then I put it back in the envelope, put the envelope back in the bag, and I folded the top of the bag shut and set it on the table, and I finished my glass of water. That night in the guest room I could not sleep. I lay in the dark in that beautiful house in Bellevue, and I thought about Diane. I thought about the 17 days. I thought about the second mortgage and the overtime shifts and the thermos I packed every morning at 5 and the shoes with the separated soles. I thought about the manila folder in the bottom drawer of my desk. I thought, he doesn't see me. He has not seen me in a very long time. Maybe he never did. Maybe I spent 22 years making myself invisible through the act of providing, and he learned so well that I was the background that he forgot I was also a person. I thought about the truck in the driveway. I did not cry. I want you to know that. I have done my crying for Diane, for the years, for the version of my son I keep trying to find behind the man he's become. What I felt that night was quieter than crying. It was the particular stillness that comes when you finally stop waiting for something to happen and accept that it has already happened, and you missed it, and now you have to decide what to do next. I flew home to Dayton on December 26th. Andrew drove me to the airport. We talked about traffic and the weather and whether I wanted a coffee for the road. He hugged me at the departures drop-off and said he'd call me soon. He had said that before. I want to be precise about what happened next, because I know how these stories can get misread. I was not acting out of anger. Anger is hot and fast, and I have never been a hot and fast man. What I was acting out of was clarity. For the first time in perhaps 10 years, I was seeing my situation with the kind of precise, unromantic clarity that comes when you finally stop explaining away what is directly in front of you. I made an appointment with an attorney in Dayton. His name is Martin, and he's been my attorney for 15 years. He handled the estate when Diane died, helped me with the house refinancing. The kind of attorney a man like me can actually afford, who is nonetheless good at what he does. I told Martin everything. The $214,000, the $50 gift card, the truck. He listened without interrupting, which I've always appreciated about Martin. Then I told him what I wanted to do. My will, which Martin had drawn up 12 years prior, left everything to Andrew: the house, the remaining savings, a small life insurance policy, all of it. We rewrote it. I am leaving the house to a cousin of Diane's named Patricia, who has 3 kids and could use it far more than Andrew and Melissa ever would. The savings, what remains of the $31,000, which is now closer to $22,000 after the past year, I am splitting between 2 charities, one that supports widows and widowers in financial crisis, and one that funds trade apprenticeships for young men from low-income families. The life insurance policy I changed to benefit a neighbor of mine, a widow named Ruth, who is 71 and lives alone and has no family nearby. She has brought me dinner twice when my knee was bad. She earns that policy more than my son does. Martin drafted everything cleanly and legally. There is no version of this that Andrew can contest successfully. I'm in sound mind. Martin made sure the documentation reflects that. Every decision was made deliberately, without duress, with full understanding of what I was doing. I did not tell Andrew. I flew back to Dayton, put the documents in the bottom drawer of my desk next to the manila folder, and went back to my life. I took a walk every morning. I cooked real meals. I called Patricia, and we talked for 2 hours. The first real conversation I'd had in months. I thought about getting that dog. In February, Andrew called. It was a Sunday, which felt almost nostalgic. He sounded good, upbeat, a little distracted. He mentioned that he and Melissa were thinking about starting a family. He mentioned that the Bellevue house was appreciating faster than expected. Great investment. He mentioned, almost as an aside, that he and Richard had been looking at investment opportunities together. Richard had some contacts, some interesting things in development. He did not ask about my knee. He did not ask about Christmas, how I was feeling, whether the flight home had been all right. At the end of the call, he said, "Hey, Dad, I know things have been a little sparse lately. We should plan something this summer. Get you out here again." I said that sounded nice, he said. And hey, I've been meaning to say, I know the gift situation at Christmas was kind of low-key on our end. Things were stretched pretty thin financially. I waited. But we're doing better now, he said. Richard came through with some things, and it really helped. So we're good. I said I was glad to hear it. We talked for 3 more minutes, and then he had to go. I sat with the phone in my hand. Things were stretched pretty thin financially. This from a man who had just spent $70,000 on a truck for his father-in-law. I want to be very careful here, because I am not a man who wants to be misunderstood. I did not change my will to punish Andrew. I did not do it out of spite or bitterness or the desire to see him suffer. I did it because I had finally understood something that should have been clear to me years earlier. What we give without condition will eventually be received without gratitude, and what we receive without gratitude will eventually be taken as entitlement, and entitlement, left unchecked, will devour everything, including the person doing the giving. I gave Andrew everything I had. I gave it freely, out of love, out of a promise I made to his mother in 17 terrible days when she was dying and I was desperate to make something good come from something devastating. I do not regret the giving. I regret the lesson it taught him, which is that I would always be there, bottomless, unconditional, invisible, and that there was nothing he needed to do in return, except occasionally confirm, by text or by a perfunctory phone call, that I still existed. I am 63 years old. I have bad knees and a manageable pension, and a house that needs a new roof in the next 2 years. I have a neighbor named Ruth, who brings me dinner. I have Patricia, who calls every 3 weeks, and asks actual questions and listens to the actual answers. I have the manila folder in the desk drawer, and I have the new documents beside it, and I have the particular piece of a man who has stopped waiting. Andrew has not called since February. I don't know if he senses something or if he's simply busy in the way he's always been busy. Too busy for me, specifically. It doesn't matter. Either way, the documents are signed and filed, and Martin has a copy, and there's nothing to be undone. I think about Diane sometimes, when I'm walking in the morning. I wonder what she would make of all this, of Andrew, of Melissa, of the truck, and the $50 gift card, and the house in Bellevue. I think she would be sad. Diane was a woman who believed in people, who assumed the best until she was shown otherwise, and even then she found some way to extend a little more grace. That was her great gift, and her great vulnerability too. She would have kept giving. She would have kept calling on Sundays. But Diane is gone, and I am the one who stayed. And I am 63, and my knees hurt. And I have $22,000 and a house that needs a roof. And I am the one who has to live the rest of this life. I chose to live it as myself. A man who has dignity. A man who understood, finally, that love is not a debt, and sacrifice is not a guarantee. And a father, even a father who drove a city bus for 28 years and wore shoes with separated soles and packed a thermos every morning at 5, deserves to be seen. I have not regretted a single line of those documents. I do think about the $50 gift card sometimes. I never used it. It's still in the envelope, in the paper bag with the airport pretzels, sitting on the shelf in my kitchen. I don't know exactly why I kept it. Maybe because it's the most honest thing Andrew has ever given me, a precise and accidental accounting of exactly what I was worth to him at the end. $50. After everything, I keep it so I don't forget. Not so I stay angry, I told you, I'm past anger. I keep it so I stay clear. So that on the mornings when I miss my son, when I pick up the phone and think about calling and then set it back down, I remember what clarity costs and why it matters, and what it means to finally, at 63, with bad knees and a manageable pension, and a neighbor who brings me dinner, choose yourself. I have not called him. I do not plan to, and I do not regret a thing.